Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, which is essentially Batman fan fiction. When people ask me what that story is about, I tell them it's Batman at age 11. And we're going to be talking a lot about writing your fanfic and my fanfic. I just changed the protagonist name from Batman to Banneker Bones, so now you know my secrets, and I made him at age 11. If you're curious about that, there are 3 books available. Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees kicks off a trilogy. You can get that as an audiobook, a paperback, and the ebook is free. Free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. So get yourself a copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. When you're hooked on the series, come see me with money for books 2 and 3. Under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I write novels for older readers, such as my young adult novel, All Together Now, a Zombie Story, Walking Dead fan fiction, and I'll prove it. The thing that causes the zombie apocalypse is Kirkman's Soda, which, if you're a Walking Dead fan, you know that's based on Robert Kirkman. There's a Dr. Romero late in the book. The characters' names are Ricky and Michelle. I'm really not trying to hide my fandom. And then, of course, I've got the Book of David, which is Stephen King fan fiction. That's a 5-volume serial horror novel. If you're curious about that, the Book of David, Chapter 1 by Robert Kent is free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. So check that out. Come back and see me with money for volumes 2, 3, 4, and 5. You've got aliens, you've got religion, you've got me doing my best Stephen King impersonation. It's a good time. And as always, for what's going on with the show, what's going on with me, what's going on with everything that is good in this world, go to middlegradeninja.com. That is more than enough. We got to get started. We've got an incredible guest this evening. We're going to talk Spider-Man and Star Wars, just all my favorite things. Our guest tonight is Preeti Chhibber. And I know I said it wrong.
You're so close.
Off to a bad start. So.
It's fine. My whole life, it's that very slight beat of hesitation before saying the name out loud, with which I am so familiar.
What kills me is I've been listening to you on and off all week because you've been on multiple podcasts. I was saying before we got started here that I think our roles are reversed. You should be hosting the podcast, and I should be a guest. You did what? You did Comics. You've got the Desi Geek Girls. How many podcasts have you hosted or co-hosted?
Oh gosh, I think 6. If we're going through all of my history, Comics, which I did with a very, very dear friend, Paul Montgomery. Bookrageous, which was just like a bunch of us nerding out about books. Desi Geek Girls, of course. Strong female characters. The Spectacular Spider Cast, which is currently running with my buddy Alex Segura. I just enjoy it. It's basically anytime I can be like, can I just hang out with my friends and feel productive about doing it? I'm all in.
Yeah, we're not just sitting around talking about our love of Spider-Man and Star Wars. God, no, we are promoting things.
Exactly. You're still being productive. It's great.
We are promoting fantastic things. I'll just do this right up the front. Avengers Assembly Orientation, which just released August 4th. We're promoting things like Star Wars, The Clone Wars, Stories of Light and Dark, which comes out at the end of this month, August 25th, or depending on when you're listening to this, is already available. You could be enjoying it now. And then October 20th, A Jedi You Will Be, which might be my favorite title for a picture book ever.
It's really cute. Mike D's art in A Jedi You Will Be, which is a picture book for little kids, going through Yoda teaching Luke how to be a Jedi, but also teaching the reader how to be a Jedi. And Mike D's illustrations are just some of the best versions of Yoda I think I've ever seen. Like he's my phone background right now. One of Mike's illustrations. It's so cute. I don't know if you can see it because it's blurry, but it's the cutest. I love it so much.
I am excited. If there are any publicists listening, I'm assuming they all are, send me art. I don't know if I'll review it, but I'll definitely enjoy it. So Preeti, if you wouldn't mind, I always ask our guests to start by introducing themselves to a esteemed audience. Give kind of an overview of your background. That way you don't have to sit through me fumbling through it.
Sure. So my name is Preeti Chhibber. I am a huge nerd and have somehow parlayed that into writing about some of my favorite characters, from Spider-Man to Ms. Marvel to Anakin, and just kind of being, I worked in children's publishing for a really long time. I worked at Scholastic, basically my 20s and 30s, like the early part of my 30s, and then I quit my job to write full-time just a little over a year ago, because I just was like, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. And I also...
Fortuitous timing.
I know, right? It's like, cool. Decide to leave, and then the world falls apart. But also, I we joked about earlier, I podcast a lot. I do geek culture writing online for sci-fi.com, and I've written for like Polygon and Book Riot and a bunch of other sites. Basically, I grew up on the internet talking about stuff I loved, and then I wanted to do that for a living, and now that's what I do.
Leading a charmed life. We're going to get to... I've seen footage of you interviewing the Spider-Man Far From Home cast. I ate my heart out in jealousy. Oh my God, that looks like the most fun thing you could ever do. Well, you know what? Let's start there. Was it a fun thing to do, or were you your heart in your throat, and that it's a fun thing to remember having done?
It is one of the most stressful experiences of my life, because I do for geek culture stuff, I do a lot of commentary and that side of things. I don't do straight interviews as frequently, except during conventions, which is a whole different ballgame, because everybody's kind of like, we've been here for 1 million years and we're never going to leave this convention. We're all in it together. A junket is a very, very different experience. They flew us into London, which was amazing, but you're in London for 48 hours, and it's packed schedule, and and these poor cast members are sitting in a room just talking to people 5 minutes at a time for 9 hours a day. And it's this wild experience, where it's still also really cool, because also I wrote a book associated with the movie, which is part of the reason I got to go do it. I wrote a tie-in novel to Spider-Man Far From Home called Peter and Ned's Ultimate Travel Journal, which was the coolest thing I've ever done, because Spider-Man is hands down probably my favorite character of all time. And so they send you over, and I was kind of doing double duty, both as an author and as the interviewer, and it was just really fun. Everyone was really nice. I had interviewed Jacob Batalon at Comic-Con a year earlier, or year and a half earlier, 2017 maybe, and he remembered me because he's the nicest person ever, so that was really nice. I don't know if he remembered me or my glasses, but he remembered something.
Take it, whatever it is.
I know, right? He was like, hey, I know you, and I was like, do you? Are we friends?
Because I'm telling everyone we are from now on.
I was actually way more stressed out. Meeting the main cast was super exciting, of course, because they're all amazing. But I was super stressed out about meeting Jake Gyllenhaal and Samuel L. Jackson. I watched Donnie Darko, I think 3 times in a row when I turned 18. I was like, this is the deepest movie I've ever seen in my life. And so I was really, really freaking out about having to sit across from Jake Gyllenhaal and be coherent and be a person who can speak sentences. But
you have crush feelings for him, or just fan feelings about Donnie Darko?
He's it's funny, because it's one of those things you don't expect to, if I had told my 18-year-old self that, in however many years you're going to be interviewing this person as part of your professional life, I think she would have fainted. So I was very nervous because of that association, that very strange kind of I knew I was excited about you when I was young, and it was a formative moment. And that's hard to contend with sometimes as an adult in this space where you have to be able to like speak to people that you have all these like kind of feelings for in terms of your nostalgia and like part of who you are and how you became the person you are. Because, you know, now as an adult, you watch Donnie Darko and you're like, there's a lot happening in that movie. a lot of choices were made narratively that you're, you know, sure. But as a kid, you're like, oh, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And it's going to inform the artistic choices I make for probably quite a few years. So that was just a really interesting place to be in. I did make him laugh.
Mad World over every video you made.
Very cool. I'll put on my like Drive-Thru Records t-shirt and just be sad. No, I did make him laugh once during the interview, which was like a very big deal for me. And Samuel L. Jackson also was like super, super cool and super nice, but I embarrassed myself at the end, which was a good story. It's very charming, but at the time I was so mortified. I like thanked them for the interview and then I stood up and I hit my head on the boom mic. And Jake leaned forward. He was like, oh, and I apologized by saying, sorry, first junket, as if that was a reason for me to lose my like bearings. And he laughed so hard he bent over in his chair and I like ran out of the room.
That was your first ever junket with the Spider-Man cast?
Yep. First ever junket.
You didn't like warm up with some indie movie or
first junket, and I was like messaging all of the like freelance friends I have to be like, are you going? Are you going? Are you going? And everyone's like, I'm not going. So I didn't even know anyone else who was going to be there. But it was so cool. It was a fun experience. It is like literally you sit outside, the publicist is like, you have 2 minutes, go in. And then there's someone sitting in the corner like, go, 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 like twirling their finger at you to be like, get your questions out. Okay, wrap it up. And you're like, oh my God.
Okay, so there's not really a lot of time to be like, Samuel L. Jackson, Unbreakable changed my life. Let me tell you.
No.
He knows.
You literally, I think you had like 4 minutes with like all the teams. So you had like 4 minutes and then 4 minutes. And you're kind of like, when I walked in to Jake and Samuel L. Jackson, like, I mean, Jake, like we're friends. I know, right? When I walked in, Samuel L. Jackson was like, whoa, let me look at your tattoos. And I was like, what? And then the publicist was like, you got to ask your questions.
So did you walk in there with all the questions carefully prepared and memorized for just such a...
I had cards. I had cards, which I was like, I was very thoughtful about it. I'm also like a nerd. So I was like, I got to do my homework. I got to have good questions. They've been doing this for hours. I don't want them to think I'm basic.
Fair enough. And then, of course, you get to meet Spider-Man himself, which I assume because you've written the book to go with the movie, that Tom Holland must be your favorite Spider-Man, or would I be incorrect in that assumption?
I thought he was great. I really like his iteration of Peter Parker a lot. I think it's very funny because my favorite Spider-Man is actually like the PS4 Spider-Man game. I think has hands down my favorite version of Spider-Man that exists in media outside comics, because my favorite is the kind of like mid-20s, like doesn't have his crap together, like makes a lot of bad decisions. That's my favorite Peter Parker because I find him to be someone that I can identify with very heavily. But that said, Tom Holland, I think, is just such a sweet, sweet Peter Parker. Like he's kind of the straight man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which I think is very funny because Spidey's such like a quip master. And it was something they kept telling me in my edits for the book where they were like, no, this is not that Peter. Like, you have to remember which Peter you're writing. And I'm like, oh, right. But I thought Tom Holland was great. And he was, of course, like, he's such a baby. And I'm a grown adult. So, like, I walked in and he was using the restroom when I came into the room. And he comes out of the restroom and he, like, shakes my hand. He was like, hi, I'm Tom. I was like, ah!
So how far back do you go with Spider-Man? When did Spider-Man take over your life and become your number one favorite fan character?
It's hard because I've been I think for a lot of women probably had this experience where comics didn't always feel like the most welcoming space. So when I was very little, I loved Spider-Man. I loved the cartoon. I had an older brother. And so I would like play with his figurines and that kind of thing. And then when you get a little bit older, you start to realize that the comic book stores might not always be the most accessible spaces, but that was where you had to buy your comics. And so there was a disconnect. So I walked away because I found it to be a little intimidating. And then I came back to it as an adult, like probably in my mid-20s or so, early to mid-20s, because of Comics, actually. And because Marvel created their Marvel Unlimited app, which made it so easy to read everything. Like, I think I read the entirety of Ultimate Spider-Man in, like, 3 weeks.
That sounds like a great 3 weeks.
It was a wonderful 3 weeks. I cried a lot.
The stories do get emotional. Especially in the Ultimate line.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, you mentioned because I firmly remember old enough. I'm old enough to remember when geek culture wasn't mainstream, and you literally were ostracized for loving the thing that now everyone loves. There's no shame in saying I like Star Wars. Like, yeah, of course, you're part of the United States, right? We all like that. Was there ever a time when that was not cool? Yeah.
I mean, my family are all nerds. Like I've done a lot of like, interviews and podcasts now about Star Wars because of the books, and the question always comes up of like what's your earliest memory of Star Wars? Like do you remember how it felt watching the movies? And I'm always like, no, like I don't have a recollection of watching the movies for the first time because it's always been there. Like, I wish I could remember learning like what it felt like to see the reveal of Vader and Luke, but it's just like always been in my life. It's always been a part of it. So I can't even disconnect the two. And I went to a nerd school. Like I went to a magnet program when I was in high school. So I already wasn't cool. So it was like, okay. Like the things you like because you're already never going to be the like really cool popular person.
Would you feel like comic culture is getting, obviously there's a long way to go. We've all read stories of toxic fandom and some of the terrible things that happens online, but people online are just in general terrible. Do you find that comic culture and geek culture is becoming more welcoming?
It's a tough question because I think that there is a desire for it to be more inclusive, and you can see it in the very, very small way in which we're getting new perspectives writing these stories. And I say small because it is, you look at who is allowed to write the stories, and it is still very much like, oh, you're a Pulitzer Prize winner. Here, you can write Black Panther. It's like the barrier to entry is still pretty high. But I do think that because of the internet, we've allowed pockets of very welcoming and very inclusive fandoms to exist, which is really awesome. Like you can find people like you who like the things you do instead of having to be in a situation where you feel like you're the isolated person. So like I can find Desi Geek Girls is a perfect example. It started because me and my friend Swapna Krishna were both super into Star Wars. Like that's kind of how our friendship started, was being like kind of embarrassingly into Star Wars and like looking at the Force Awakens trailer frame by frame, trying to figure out like whose hand was holding the lightsaber. And we were like, man, I wish there was more space for like South Asian women in geekdom and what that looks like. And so we started Desi Geek Girls, and there are a ton of us. There's so many of us. It's just like having the access to those spaces, and the internet has allowed for that, which I think is amazing.
Well, we started with we know how the story ends with you shaking Tom Holland's hand right after he comes out of the bathroom. So
presumably he washed his hands.
Take us back to your master plan to get into children's publishing, and from there, eventually meet Tom Holland.
It started when I was 4. No. It's funny. I'm a child of immigrants. I'm first gen born here, and it was very much assumed that I was going to be a doctor. I have an older brother, a younger sister, and it was like doctor, lawyer, engineer. That's what's coming out of the family. Did not work out for any of us. My older brother's an actor. My little sister's a graphic designer. Nope. But so it wasn't until I got to undergrad in college and started, I've always been a reader. I've always been much, much better on that side. I'm terrible at math and science. And I remember talking to my brother, who had already at that point been like, no, I want to be an actor. Like, I'm not going to go this route. And he was like, why are you pre-med? Why are you taking these classes that you hate when what you're good at is reading and writing? Like, that's what you love. And he met somebody who worked in publishing. He met someone who worked at Tor, which is a sci-fi imprint of Macmillan. And I had a conversation with her, and she was like, you should come intern. So I did an interview, and I interned at Tor Publishing one summer when I was in undergrad, and it was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had. And it kind of was like, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to be involved in the world of books. And then children's publishing was a little bit of an accident. I actually met someone when I moved to New York who worked in publishing, and she was like, don't go into children's. It's a hole. Once you fall into it, you'll never get out. But I interviewed at Scholastic when I was like 24, I think, and I got the job, and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like, I work, in a building where the Babysitters Club was published. Like, that is so, so cool. And it's cool getting to like access these books that can be formative for children and be, do for them what books did for me when I was a kid, which was like create a lifelong love of reading. And then I did that for a long time. It was very cool. But of course, as we know, New York City is very expensive to live in. And so I got some side hustles, writing geek culture stuff on the side. And one of those eventually was sci-fi.com, writing for Sci-Fi Fangirls. And I had an editor who was super into just kind of the wacky stuff I pitched. So things like, I think I have an article that's called Things That Are the Same Size as Tom Holland, because I thought it was really funny that Tom Holland and Mark Ruffalo came out on stage and were the same size, because I just wouldn't have anticipated that. And she was like, sure, write this weird post. And so somebody gave my name to an editor at Disney, and when they emailed me about potentially writing the Spider-Man book, I was able to send them back these absurd, kind of silly, funny posts I'd written for Sci-Fi, and they liked the voice a lot, and that's how I got the job.
Wow.
Yeah.
That worked out.
It was like every step taken closer and closer to get to Spidey.
So when you get that job and you're going to write the Spidey book, how do you celebrate something that huge?
I didn't. I actually spent like 2 full days being like, I can't do this. Who am I to write Spider-Man? What? And again, my friend Satna was like, you have to say yes to this. You cannot say no just because you think you can't do it. And then it all happened during New York Comic Con, actually. Like, I had a call with the editor. I was like freelance working it was very stressful. And then they were like, okay, we're going to need a book in like 6 weeks. So I didn't really celebrate until everything was over and the final draft was in. And like,
fair enough.
Awesome. It was awesome, but it was also like running around, like just stressing all the time, but also being like, I'm writing a Spider-Man book and I'm not allowed to tell anybody.
So when you're writing Spider-Man, I mean, are you playing the movie soundtracks, or do you have a playlist that's just for envisioning swinging around? Or
I have my standard movie soundtracks that I listen to when I'm writing, which are a lot of like Googling like the How to Train Your Dragon soundtrack ambient. So it's like all these like really like pretty ambient soundtracks, which is what I need. But it was a wild experience because I had to read the script for the movie, a version of the script. So they brought me into the Marvel offices in New York City, and it was the most hilarious experience because they were like, put me in a room, like 4 pieces of paper and a laptop, and we're like, okay, you have 2 hours with this script. Take as many notes as you can, and that's what you're going to use. We're going to scan them and send them back to you. And it was just a version of the script. Like, I didn't even read the finished version. They didn't tell anybody anything. So I was writing the book based off a version of the script that was then changed or different by the time the movie came out.
I mean, the villain was still the Vulture, right? So, I'm sorry, no,
it was
would have
Far
been.
From Home.
I'm terrible. I confused my Spider-Mans.
They're both very, very good villains.
Well, that's the one that if I were in that spot where I did a junket, if I met Jake Gyllenhaal, I'd be like, oh my God, Brokeback Mountain, I love it so much, and then that would be great. But if it was Michael Keaton, oh my God, my entire persona of what it is to be a man, a Batman from young childhood on, I'd
Michael Keaton
just sink into the seat, never to return.
All he would have to do is like raise his eyebrows at me, and I would be like, "You're the coolest person I've ever met in my life."
He'd be like, "Hey, nice question." I say, "Michael Keaton said I'm the most amazing writer that ever lived." Oh my God. That's been one rough thing about quarantine for COVID. And there's been so many rough things, like, my beloved Wonder Woman 1984 that I was looking forward to all year has been moved back, and I can't come out soon enough. But I keep reading movie news that I'm so excited about. I'm like, but is it real though? Is it really going to happen? I want Michael Keaton to come back as Batman in the Flashpoint paradox. That would be the most amazing thing that could ever happen.
No, but
when's it going to happen though? Are they going to shoot it 2 years?
2020 is a wash, man. This is just the year that never was.
So, okay, we were talking about your experience in children's publishing. So you're an editor and acquired?
I worked for the Scholastic Book Clubs, actually. So I worked in, I worked kind of in a few different areas during my tenure there, but eventually I was choosing the young adult novels that we sold into the book clubs.
Okay, very cool.
Mm-hmm.
A big responsibility, too. You're shaping young minds. Oh, my gosh.
It was exciting. It was really cool. It was like getting to make sure that they're getting varied perspectives and diverse voices, and it was a really cool job.
So obviously, beyond that, you've got all kinds of opportunities open to you. You could freelance anywhere, I imagine. Who wouldn't be thrilled to have you at this point? They'd say, oh my God.
Oh, you never know.
The author of A Jedi, you will be done. You're in. You can write for Home and Gardens. So you've got that option open to you. I assume you're going to host 3 more podcasts by the time this episode comes out. But what gave you the confidence that now was the time for me to go and be a full-time writer?
So I was still working full-time when I did Spider-Man and when I did, right? Wasn't I? Yes. Like, what year is it? When did this book come out? Yeah, when I was still working full-time when I wrote the book, but actually getting that book deal was kind of what spurred my decision, because I was like, I really like the act of writing. I enjoy getting to sit down and just put words on the page. And I was freelancing enough at the time that I was like, I could probably increase this level, because I'd been freelancing and working full time for probably like 8 years prior to that. So like really building a resume, building a portfolio, like spent a lot of time kind of side hustling and doing the full time gig. And it just felt like the right time to do it, because I was like, it just felt like a tipping point. Like I was like, if I want to do this, I feel like I have to really commit to it. I didn't have an agent at the time. I was just kind of scrambling. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then I put the word out, because I also built a lot of connections over that time. I went to a lot of, I worked a lot of conventions before Scholastic and for my freelance life. And so met a lot of people and maintained all those connections. And that was part of it too. So it was just, I spent basically a decade building to get to that point, and then was like, okay, I feel like now I can do it.
Well, I'm sure it didn't take you long to find an agent.
My agent will laugh, because I basically, what happened was I was like, I'm not going to try to get an agent until I finish this like book I want to write. And then my editor at Scholastic, Michael Paternak, approached me. I was like, we have this potential idea for a Kamala Khan book. Would you be interested? And then I was like, I don't know how to do anything, and now I need an agent.
Well, Kamala Khan, that should be right up your alley. You're in the Avengers. That's your playground. All the Marvel stories, right? In fact, well, we can get right there because that's a book that just came out, is available now. Avengers Assembly Orientation. But my question when I saw Miles Morales is there too, like, how does that not from the Ultimate Spider-Man Ultimate Spider-Man fan just become the Miles Morales story, Miles Morales and Friends, a novel?
Well, so part of it is that, Peter Parker is my favorite because I always really identified with him and his kind of bad luck, his life of like being a hero despite all of the awful things that happened to him and like working beyond this terribleness. And I identify him with him on that level, but I never had anyone who looked like me or who had a similar upbringing or who had all these things that are intrinsic to who I am until Kamala Khan really came out, until G. Willow Wilson, Sana Amanat, and Adrian Alphona released that first volume. And that first issue of Ms. Marvel. And it was like, I was an adult and I was like, I would have lost my mind to have this as a kid. Like, I would have given anything to have this kind of superhero who was going through, and she really is like the Peter Parker of a new generation, She's balancing school and being a hero. She's trying to figure out what it means to grow up, but also like what it means to be good. Like it's all of these different things that are what I love about Spider-Man, but in whose parents are immigrant, who is South Asian, who has all these things that I find so familiar. So it was like a dream come true getting to write this character because I've never connected so deeply to a character before on multiple levels.
So do you feel like not a sense of ownership, but maybe like a sense of extra kinship now that you've written that character, where you could maybe go on and write book after book? Also, will you be writing book after book about Kamala Khan?
It's more that I'm glad I got to spend time with her in this kind of book, which is like a really fun middle grade like adventure story. It's heavily illustrated with illustrations by James Lancet, which are so cute and funny. A lot of comic stuff, but it's very much about this girl dealing with a friendship. I don't know that I want other writers to get a chance with her because there's so few characters like this, and there's so many amazing South Asian writers, Muslim writers, like who should all get a chance to connect with this character in the way that I got to.
Well, that's a very, very generous answer. So good for you taking the high ground. Me, I would be petty and jealous forever. Like, no, it's fine.
That's because I have so many other books I want to write. I'm like, let me write my YA Luke Skywalker novel.
Oh, well, there you go. Fair enough. Oh, there's not enough time to do all the nerdy projects.
I know. I said yes. I have so much stuff coming out this year because last year I panicked pretty heavily about work and said yes to everything.
Well, all the right things.
Yes.
Of the three we've talked about, maybe there's a fourth I don't know about that's just terrible, but these three sound amazing. With the when you mentioned your illustrator, James Lancet, so when so much of the story is going to be told in those comic panels and through illustrations, how does that collaboration work to make sure that you're, I don't know, was vibing the appropriate term here for making this creative project?
IP is a little different because, you don't have a ton of control because you are playing in someone else's sandbox, basically. So, James and I didn't collaborate directly. Basically, like, I worked with my editor and then he worked with the editor and they did it that way. He's in England, I think. Like, we've never met or anything. Everything has been virtual. But so I wrote the script and I would write out like how I thought the illustrations would like could look, and I'm sure he was like, you don't know how illustrations work. Like, I'm okay. But so I would write out like, a comic script essentially. And then when I got to see passes and got to see art and all of those things, and it was kind of like that. It was like me, editor, James, editor, me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the editors got final say on all of that.
Yeah.
And I just when you approach a project like that, is there a pretty strict? I mean, how much do you have other than? I mean, are you responsible for all continuity for those characters up to that point? I assume not, since we're joining her a little younger in the story.
No, it is funny though. I mean, there are certain truths about Kamala Khan and Miles and Doreen that exist, and there's certain like everybody like Marvel 100% sees it, reads it, like signs off on everything, because you don't want to be in a position of contradicting somebody else's work. Or there's this book called Marvel the Untold Story, which is like one of my favorite reads of all time, and it's the history of Marvel Comics, and it is fascinating. But they talk about prior to like when the digital age, when they were talking about continuity, and they would have this room that was just like a whole bunch of file folders, and you would go through when you were writing like Spider-Man, say, and you would have to be like, okay, Spider-Man, can I bring Spider-Man into my book right now? Or is he in like the negative zone? And they would have updated every week to make sure that you knew where every character was so that you weren't contradicting somebody else's work.
Oh, wow.
I know, because the world is so big. The Marvel universe is so big, and they had so much interaction between the characters, so they really had to keep it straight.
Okay, so you can't just and now Hulk shows up just because I like it.
No. I could be like, I would have lists. I'm like, could I really? I want this person in it, and they would be like yes or no, and for their whatever reason. So I would have backup plan on backup plan on backup plan, basically.
So, I mean, do you have to, since you're getting that approved up front, then how's this working? Are you writing an outline that goes and gets that approval? Mm-hmm. What's the process for writing an Avengers book?
For this one, I can't speak to all of them, but for this one, it was outlining chapter by chapter. Then that would go out for approval. I would make edits based on whatever comments. Once that was approved, then I could start writing. Write a draft, send it in, get comments, get it back, make edits, send it back. And so it's kind of like homework all the time. Being a writer is doing homework all the time, but like for the fun class.
Yeah, like the world's best homework. None of my homework in school ever was like, write a story about your favorite superhero. I'd ace that homework. And then with the Avengers, I had a couple of questions for you, and of course they've gone all right out of my head. But I did want to know how much additional research did you have to do, or did you already have it all up here just from years of fandom?
No, I'm not a person who it doesn't stick in my head. Like, I know there are people who are really good at being like in issue 17 in 1972. Like, I'm not that person. I can have read a comic book 7 times and I still will be like, what issue was that? Like, I can't tell you how many times I've looked up the issue where I think it's Spectacular Spider-Man, where Felicia Black Cat is horrified that she sees Peter Parker's face for the first time. Like, it's one of my favorite storylines. It's one of my favorite issues, and still, every time I want to reference it, I have to Google it to remember what issue it's in. Like, I cannot remember that stuff. So I did a lot of reading. I reread like all of Ms. Marvel. I reread a ton of Ultimate for Miles. And I reread a ton of Squirrel Girl, the Ryan North and Erica Henderson, which is one of the best comics that exists. It's so funny. So a lot of research, but fun research again.
So if Marvel comes to you and they say, Preeti, we're throwing out all continuity, don't even worry about it. We're gonna create the U universe from now on. You could have any combination of characters in any genre of story. There's a lot of pressure on one question.
Yep.
So we'll just say it's not definitive. You would probably come up with a different idea tomorrow. But for tonight, while we're chatting, what would you do if you had total free reign?
Oh my god. I mean, it's hard because my favorite characters, I don't know would work that super fun in a story together. Because like my favorite characters from Marvel are like Spider-Man, Ms. Marvel, Nightcrawler, Gambit. Like I don't know how well that dynamic would work. I feel like it would be like part chaos, part like super forlorn. Like Nightcrawler kind of bringing it down a little bit every so often. Oh, that's such a hard question because I think one of my favorite comics of the recent era is Loki, Agent of Asgard from Al Ewing. And of course, the artist's name is escaping me, even though I think he's amazing. But what I really like about what they did was playing with the very idea of narrative and the very idea of story and how that works in a universe like comics where everything is so broad and gets reset so frequently and how nothing lasts forever except certain truths unless it's like way far AUs. I think that would be really fun to play with someone who's had a very long history in comics like Nightcrawler, who's had a very, very long history in Marvel, and what his story actually means and what it means for him to be a character in a universe like that, I think could be really cool.
And have you got a villain or villains that you'd want to use?
I would say a new villain. I would want someone new. But I'm going to hold that close to my chest because, maybe I'll get to write them someday.
And if Marvel says no, it's a new character, it could be, that could be just a you thing.
Yeah.
If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Teleportation.
Good choice.
Easy, but long distance. Like, not like any of this, like, you can only go 10 feet nonsense. Like, I want to be able to go anywhere.
Like off planet? Dr.
Anywhere.
Manhattan style?
Like, no rules. I can teleport anywhere.
Like to the start of my life, so I'm also working in Backdoor Live Forever. I just teleported back to the start.
That's your time. No. Time travel is stressful. No. Only no time travel.
Fair enough. I've opened up all sorts of continuity issues for you. Well, we've talked enough nerd stuff. It's time we moved on to Star Wars. hard pivot. So let's talk about Star Wars: The Clone Wars, Stories of Light and Dark, the anthology that will be available at the end of this month, August 25th. If you would just give esteemed audience kind of an overview of that anthology and what we can look forward to.
Sure. So it's an anthology of retellings of Clone Wars episodes by a bunch of incredible authors like Anne Ursu or Zoraida Cordova. The list is very long. I've read Zoraida's Ventress story, and it is so good. But it's basically all of us basically taking on specific episodes of the Clone Wars and retelling those stories from whatever perspectives we want to.
Okay. Wow. I am gonna reveal a lack in my nerddom. I watched my first two episodes of Clone Wars this week in preparation and talking with you because I read your story first, and I was like, I just imagined Hayden Christensen the whole time. That's fine. Then I'm like, hey, you know what? Do your basic research. I was blown away, but why didn't anyone tell me that this show existed? Which, of course, the whole world had been telling me. I was just an adult and had too much other stuff to get to it. And now I've got it all to look forward to. Well, we've got our Disney Plus. I've got a 6-year-old that watches Hamilton every 2 hours, a nonstop on loop. So we had to sign up for Disney Plus, and so now I've got all the Clone Wars to look forward to, and I very much enjoyed the first 2 episodes. So I assume that everything in your story was a hostage crisis.
Yeah, the hostage crisis, which is the end of the first season. though the Clone Wars is a non-linear storytelling for the first several seasons. So
most of my questions about why did you do this way are now useless to me, because the answer is it's a retelling. Although I felt like, and this is going to show my ignorance, that it fit in nicely with Attack of the Clones. So which I'd seen. All right, well, I just assume this is somewhere in that timeline, but off just a little bit, right?
It's so they did ask us, like, when I was approached to do it, it was like, who do you want to write? And I was like, Anakin. He is my absolute favorite disaster angst Jedi. I love him so much, even though he's such a disaster. There's a running theme with my favorite characters, if you can't tell. And then they're like, what do you want to write? And I wanted to write a Padme and Anakin story, because I find their romance, in Clone Wars specifically, I think builds the romance really, really well between them. And in all of its tragedy and sadness. And so I wanted to do one that shows Anakin on the verge of becoming who he will be, but you can see how intensely he loves and how important that is to him, and how easily that can go sideways when it takes up too much of you.
See, I had the music experiences. I'm reading early on. No, we won't get into spoiler territory. But as I'm reading, and he's saying, well, let's just go someplace where we can be in love. And I was that sort of irritating boyfriend at one point for like 2 weeks in high school. I've been that guy. And that's not a healthy person to be. And then I'm thinking, like, oh, wait a minute. What do I know about Anakin Skywalker? Not entirely healthy. Okay, that adds up. My instincts are right, Padme. Get out of there. It won't end well.
Well, he loves her so much, and she loves him so much, and it's just, it's so sad.
Did you cry while you were writing this one?
No. No, I watched the episode like 10 times. I read the script, and then I had to watch a few other episodes. Like, I had to watch an episode that came before it, like, chronologically. There's a list on StarWars.com that has every single episode of the Clone Wars listed out in chronological order, if you wanted to do it that way, so you can see the character evolution chronologically instead of how they show it to us. Because also, you don't know Ahsoka Tano that well yet, but Ahsoka Tano is hands down the best character in all of Star Wars. Like, all of it. She is the best.
Being played by Rosario Dawson in Mandalorian.
I don't know if that's confirmed or not. I know that was the rumor. I have no idea if it was ever actually confirmed. I mean, I would love to see a live action Ahsoka. I think I just want Ahsoka to get her own thing. Like, she's so awesome and has such potential for amazing story. E.K. Johnston wrote a novel about Ahsoka that is one of my favorite pieces of, like, other medium Star Wars storytelling. And her story just has so much in it that we don't know yet and that I want to know.
I feel like that rumor's been around long enough. I've heard it in enough places that I assumed it was already a thing. So I think that even if they filmed something else, by the time the internet got to the boiling point of reaction, they went back and reshot that stuff. She's Ahsoka now.
Yeah, I don't know. This is where I'm like, gotta be careful because I don't know anything.
Well, when you obviously not for the Clone Wars it's been out for a time, even though I'm late in catching up to it. You don't have to go and sit in a secret office and read never before seen screenplays, so that pressure at least.
Yeah, no, that was nice. That was nice not having to do that, because I was like, oh, I've seen this episode a million times. It was before Disney Plus, though, so I couldn't just, like, sign up for Disney Plus and watch it. I had to be like, I really need access to this episode. Thank you.
Did you not already own box sets all around the home?
No. I'll do, because it was on Netflix for a long time. Netflix had the rights to play Clone Wars, and then they lost it either last year or year before, I think.
And so, when you're, one thing I noticed is that you're doing a lot in a very short amount of time. It's not do you remember offhand what the word count was for the final version?
Sure, it's something like 3,500. I feel like maybe somewhere around there. Around 3,000 to 3,500. I think. I'd have to look at my Word document, but I'm pretty sure it's somewhere in that arena.
You don't walk around with the exact number memorized?
No. I was working on another short story at the time for a anthology that's coming out from Penguin Random House called, right now is titled Sword Stone Table, which is a retelling of Arthurian legends. And so I'm going back and forth because that word count is like 10,000 words. And I just remember being like, I got to keep the way to tell stories straight in my head, whether it's short or long.
Well, 10,000 words. Now that I've seen what you've done with the 35 or however many it was, I expect you can get a whole trilogy in. One thing I noticed you did, which made sense, is there's not a whole lot of physical description of anybody. Not an issue. Why are you reading this book if you don't know what the characters look like? Right?
I don't know why you would care about Anakin and Padme's story if you were not familiar with the Skywalker tragedy already.
Star Wars. I've heard of this. I think I'll start with this anthology, and if I like it, maybe I'll watch a film. So you're saving space there, but you're also, the action is moving fast. So what tips do you have for consolidate? How many drafts did it take to do that, to get it down that tight?
I think this was actually pretty easy in terms of edits. Like, I did my draft and I had a few light edits when it came back to me. Writing action is not something I had done before, so that was kind of fun to learn. Like, I remember trying to write action when in my fanfic days, back when I was like, in high school and college, and I always felt like I don't know what I'm doing. And even here, I still felt a little bit like I don't know what I'm doing, but it was just trying to remember that you want the reader to feel the anxiety that Anakin is going through. And so having those like very punchy moments. There's another book. There's a book called, this is related, I swear. It's going to sound like it's not related, but it is. There's a book called Red or Dead by David Peace, which is this like very, very long book that is ostensibly about Bill Shankly's tenure as the Liverpool Football Club manager. I bring it up.
Oh, that makes sense because...
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I bring it up because it's some of the best writing I've ever seen, but there's this passage where David Peace writes a match. He's writing a football match that Liverpool is playing. And I remember reading the passage sitting on the subway, and I could feel my heart starting to race like I was watching an actual football match happening, like waiting for the goal to be scored. And I just found it to be so incredible, like what you can do with language to initiate that visceral response. And so trying to remember that while writing action sequences has been really important for me, of like remembering that the cadence of a sentence can impact the way a reader reads and the way a reader reacts.
Gotcha. So can you think of some specific things you did to heighten the action as you were writing?
I think like staccato sentences, like making sure they're like very tight sentences. And like you said, that short word count was to kind of heighten that anxiety because you're going through it so quickly. In the same way that Anakin was going through it so quickly, you only have moments to get through this experience. And so that was one thing I did think about.
And well, here's kind of a dumb question, maybe not, because it ties in the writing about Spider-Man and Kamala Khan and everybody as well. How difficult is it when you're writing with a character that has powers? Because at one point, well, I assume it's not that much of a spoiler since fans will have seen the episode. Anakin is lightsaberless, and I was like, oh my god, what's he gonna do? And I was, oh right, he has force powers and all kinds of awesome stuff he can do before he gets to chopping folks up. So when you've got characters like that, or like a Spider-Man, how much extra trouble does that cause you in trying to figure out how to corner them? Because you can't just you can't just be a guy with a gun. That's not a concern.
Well, I think what's fun about writing superheroes and writing characters with powers is that you recognize, especially in all the storytelling we've gotten from them, that the powers don't fix anything. Having these powers are never the reason their lives are great. They're often the reason their lives are much, much harder. And so it's never the powers were never an issue in terms of like, oh, how will I make sure that they're in enough trouble or whatever. One thing that was sometimes difficult, you know, with like Kamala Khan was making sure the powers were consistent and that I was describing them and using them in a way that made sense for readers who had never read Kamala Khan before, but also for readers who were very familiar with her comics. So that was an interesting conundrum because so many different people writing a character, you always have to take into account that character's history, but how much of that history will be involved and how much do the rules matter when it's something like a middle grade novel that's for kids who might not be super familiar. That was more something that I came up against than necessarily the powers making it more difficult to write the actual story.
That makes sense. And then, same question as with the Marvel Universe. Disney says, you did such a wonderful job with your no holds barred Avengers story. Now we're going to give you free reign of the Star Wars universe. You can bring back characters we thought were dead and undo previous trilogies JJ style if you want. You can do anything that you want to do with the Star Wars universe. Where are you setting your story? Who's going to be in it?
I want a Luke Skywalker YA novel. I want like 15-year-old Luke.
like before he gets that message from R2D2.
Pre A New Hope. It's him on Tatooine. Like, I just love Luke Skywalker a lot. Like, I love Anakin, but like Luke is my like dopey farm boy of my heart. He tries so hard. He's just, and I think that's another one where it's like there's so much story to tell. Like I love Ahsoka, but I think I would have trouble telling Ahsoka's story. So there are other writers I want to write Ahsoka. But Luke, I would love to get my hands on Luke because he's just so sweet and like such a teen boy. Like that, like I was gonna go to the power converters. Like I want to write that kid.
Just hanging out with this power converters and staring off at the multiple suns every day. Yes. And I assume somewhere in there you have to tease his force or his force powers.
Sure.
It's just like a moment where the glass disappears between him and the snake, and oh my god.
Totally.
I like it. I would want to read your story.
It's basically like a slice of life Luke Skywalker story.
You wouldn't want to bring. I mean, obviously you couldn't. Well, if he's 15, maybe he goes to whatever dance there is on what planet's he on, the desert planet?
Tatooine.
Tatooine, yes.
Yeah.
So he goes to they wouldn't call it the Tatooine prom, but whatever the prom is for Luke Skywalker, and maybe Han Solo's there as somebody's date, and they don't really know each other that well because you want to bring in somebody, right?
The other one that I'm fascinated by, and again, I don't know that I'm the person to write this. Like, I think there are other writers who could do it. Is there's clearly like a time overlap where Leia and Cassian Andor were both working the rebellion at the same time, and I like desperately want that meeting. I want to see the two of them interact so badly. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but like I really want it.
There was kind of an announcement. I don't know if it's been 100% confirmed, but I keep reading that Donald Glover is going to do the Lando Calrissian TV show.
I saw that tweet. I looked it up and I was like, I don't see any official sources saying this, so I left it alone. I don't know. I loved Donald Glover as Lando. I would love to see him come back as Lando. I thought he seemed like he was having a great time, and he just filled that cape so nicely. It was great.
They do the younger Obi-Wan story.
Man.
Which I assume will be the depressing years between the...
I'll take Ewan McGregor back as Obi-Wan any day of the week, though.
Is there a scenario in which those two could, those series could cross over? I mean, I know that there's like a narrow window where the time frame's got to be right, yeah?
I don't know. They've done a really the Lucasfilm Story Group has done a really, really good job of like kind of finding pockets of time to tell stories. So like I have no idea. I'm sure the conversations are happening and they're figuring it out. But like I trust in them in terms of I feel like I was so wonderfully surprised by how great The Mandalorian was. Like, not that I didn't think it was going to be good, but I didn't know what to expect. And it was so good in the way that, like, Star Wars Rebels is one of the best Star Wars stories I think that exists. And it's not about any of our main heroes. It's not about, it's about the wider world. And I think that's what Star Wars does really well. So I totally trust for them to, like, if there's a way to do it that makes sense and doesn't feel like cheap, I think they would do it.
Well, they're definitely going to now because they're listing and they're going to be sending notification right away. We heard your pitch and we love it. We want to do it. 15-year-old Luke Skywalker. That book's coming out next year.
Stop begging to do this book on every podcast you go on.
Then they're going to say, Kent, we were going to offer you something, but we heard you hadn't watched the Clone Wars. Get out of here. I watched all the Mandalorian, though, esteemed audience. I promise. Loved it. So, you know what? Let's talk a little bit about Comic-Con. So, what is the experience of going to San Diego and New York Comic-Con the first time and getting up there and addressing your people?
It's wild. I'm trying to remember the first time I was on a panel at New York Comic-Con. Oh God, I genuinely cannot remember now because my first New York Comic-Con was 2008, I think, because I moved to New York the summer of 2007, and I think the first time I went to New York Comic-Con was 2008. And I don't know if I'm making this up, but I feel like it was when it was in February or something. So I've been going to a Comic-Con for a very, very long time. My first San Diego was 2018, and it was so different from New York. It was so I was so stressed out the whole time because New York Comic-Con is very localized. It is at the Javits Center. It's spilled over a little bit now into another building. But for the most part, it stays at the Javits Center. It doesn't go anywhere else. San Diego Comic-Con is the entire thing. It's every part of San Diego that you're in is touched by Comic-Con, and I found that to be so overwhelming. But it's also really cool when you're just oh, everyone here is as nerdy as I am. That's awesome. And it's cool when you are on a panel that is something you're passionate about. So I've been on the Super Asian American panel a couple of times, which is largely talking about Asian American representation in pop culture. And what's great is when those rooms are packed because people care about wanting to have more inclusive media is kind of some of the best feelings in the world when you're oh, people do care. It's not 4 people sitting in this room waiting for the panel that comes after it.
Well, you've got to be, any panel you do there, you've got to be facing a full room full of how many people?
It depends on what room you're in. Sometimes it's always a lot because they pack those rooms in pretty tight. But it's so funny because I can remember going to see Neil Gaiman read from the Graveyard book in 2008 or 9. I don't remember which year it was. And there was no line. I was in the third row or something. It was so easy to get into that room. And I think about what that would be like now and having to line up 3 or 4 hours in advance or whatever it was. Because there are just so many more people going. I think if you look at the attendee numbers have risen exponentially every year. It's wild. So I guess just by nature of the number of people, yeah, every panel is probably pretty full.
Fair enough. Well, here's some random fan questions to give you an opportunity to get in trouble. We'll start easy. What's a favorite fandom of yours that's not Star Wars, not Spider-Man, that maybe people wouldn't expect is a favorite fandom of yours?
I love being a fan of things. When I get into a fandom, I get in deep, and sometimes it'll last a long time, and sometimes it'll be man, I'm super into the Norwegian teen drama Skam for 6 months. But one that has been very, very long lasting is my love of Naruto.
Oh, yeah?
I love Naruto. I've loved Naruto since I was like 20 years old. Read the manga, read scanlations, like it is one of my like long-lasting great loves in terms of fandoms. Like I still like will look at fan art and be really like, "Aw."
So when's somebody gonna let you play in that universe?
No, I'm not. I would never be able to write a Naruto thing ever. That is absolutely. I will read anything other people write, but I'm not the person to write that book.
That one's just for you to enjoy and not participate in.
Yes.
Fair enough.
I'll be on Archive of Our Own.
Here's some a little bit more specific questions that might get you in trouble. These are the dangerous ones. So they're fun. Favorite Star Wars story? Knowing that we love all of them, yes, even Phantom Menace. You know the Duel of the Fates song was awesome, haters.
It is. Duel of the Fates is amazing. Favorite story. I think this came up on Twitter recently, and it's Ahsoka's life, I think, is such a wonderful story. Just we see her go from Padawan to a leader of the rebellion, and I'm so desperate to find out what happened afterwards. Like, I think that she is just one of the best evolution of a character that we've gotten to see through so many stories, and her relationship to Anakin is one, because she is his Padawan, and they have these like amazing highs and lows. Like I just think it's some of the strongest relationship writing in Star Wars, and so yeah, I think Ahsoka's through line through the Clone Wars and into Rebels is my answer.
Favorite television show?
Ever? God. Oh.
Impossible question. I'll give you 3. How about that?
Hard. 2. I get 2? Okay. 1,
2, 3, your choice.
Okay. One of my favorite comedies is Scrubs. I could watch Scrubs a billion times. I've seen it a billion times, and I could still watch it over and over and over again. Dramas. Like trying to think of like what drama. Like dramas are so much harder for me because I'll go in phases where like, of course, I loved Mad Men when it was on, but now the thought of watching Mad Men again, I'm like, oh, feels like such a slug. Like I much prefer like half-hour comedies when I'm just putting something on.
3 times, I'll do it again. I love you, Don Draper.
I think Fleabag is one I want to revisit. I watched it last summer and it like me in half. It was so good. Like it was one of those, I don't know if you watch it, but it's one of those shows that like after the second season ended, I was like, I'm not going to survive this. I'm not going to survive what this show did to my heart. And then Elementary. I freaking love Elementary.
Another excellent choice. I'm halfway through Fleabag season 1. It's one I'm watching with my wife, so it goes much slower. I can't just binge it.
Mm-hmm. I won't say anything.
Come in, you were supposed to save that for us. I'm like, yeah, okay. And I think we've all done the lie to the person you're binging with. And like, no, I definitely didn't watch this episode.
I definitely haven't seen this.
I would never cheat on you with a great TV series. That's crazy talk. Favorite video game?
I mean, it's hard because right now I just finished Final Fantasy VII, the remake, which was incredible. But...
And I know you're very Animal Crossing oriented.
Right now I'm very, very Animal Crossing oriented. I'm going to say, I think right now on this day, on whatever day it is that we're recording this evening, Spider-Man PS4. I think it was a perfect game.
Spider-Man 2 on PS2 used to be my favorite game, and then of course this one has overtaken it. And I hope and pray that Miles Morales on PS5 will. That's my whole year. That's all there is to look forward to in the world. I can't wait.
It's gonna be great. I have full confidence in the team. I'm actually pretty excited about the Avengers game too.
Yeah, I'm hoping that's gonna be amazing.
It looks really fun, and getting to see Kamala front and center, I'm pretty psyched about.
Plus, I won't have to stand in line for that one. I've already got a PS4, PS5. We'll see. It's going to be a hit. We'll see what I have to do to get my hands on one of those. And then, what's a book-oriented show? Let's say 3 favorite-ish books.
Aristotle and Dante discover the secrets of the universe, which is so good and so beautifully written, and I cannot wait for the sequel, which is, I think Benjamin Hilary Signs said he had finished like last week. I think he tweeted it, so hopefully that's coming soon. I'm cheating a little bit, but the Heroes of Olympus series, Rick Riordan, because it's so good.
Just the whole series, not one particular book in it.
No, because Heroes of Olympus, what's so good about it is like every book is good, but it's the growth of the story across the 5 books, which is what makes it so great. Although the book 3 cliffhanger still haunts me to this. It's a literal cliffhanger, and it's so mean. And then it's to wait a year to find out what happened. I'll never let it go. So good. Then, the Holly Black's Folk of the Air, the Cruel Prince. I love hate manses. I can't help it.
All excellent choices. Well, I'm watching our time and it's flying by, and I've got to ask you about flying saucers, but I'm not gonna. We're gonna hold off on that for just a moment. I'm gonna ask you instead about being a sensitivity reader, because I know that that's a service that you provide, and I talk with editors on the show on a regular basis, so esteemed audience gets to enjoy recommendations for a sensitivity reader, and I can't let the opportunity pass since I'm talking to one available for hire. What services do you provide? Why would someone come to you needing a sensitivity reader, and what will they get from you?
Basically, I can read for an North Indian American first generation born perspective in a book. So if you have a character who is Indian American, I can give it a read and kind of give you notes on how that perspective is coming across. And I don't like to say specific books I've worked on, because as a sensitivity reader, they don't have to take your advice. You're just giving advice. So it's not like you are like, do this, and then they do it and it's fixed. You're like, you could do this, and then they think about it, and then the writer and the editor will decide whether or not it makes sense. But it was just basically as a way to, because I also think that, I think the concept of diversity in kidlit is a big one, and it's not necessarily just going to be fixed by all of us getting to tell our own stories, which we should be able to tell our own stories, but also by making sure that worlds aren't just all looking one way. So if your book is set in a high school, it shouldn't just be one kind of kid who goes to that high school. And that takes some help from sensitivity readers, I think.
So what are some examples of things that you've caught in the past, generic, we won't talk about anybody specific, but what are some common things maybe that you've come across that readers should be looking out for?
So one thing for Indian characters, especially North Indian Hindu characters, are that names often matter. Again, this is all with the caveat that it is not a one-size-fits-all, that this is a very general thing, is that you can often tell where someone is from based on what their name is. Names have religious connotations, cultural connotations, and I find that's something that people don't necessarily realize. They also don't necessarily realize what it means to exist in this country when Asian people couldn't mass migrate until 1965, because that absolutely impacts what our communities look like and who got to come over and who had access to immigration to the United States. And so it's historical and cultural things that may not even occur to the writer to think about when writing a character of Indian descent.
Preeti Chhibber, have you ever seen a flying saucer, and do you believe in them?
I have not, but I have no reason not to believe in them.
Oh, I will also accept ghosts if you've seen one of those.
I think there's so little we know about the universe that there's no reason to not believe these things exist. That said, I have not, to my knowledge, seen any. But who knows? Maybe they made me forget. I don't know.
Eventually, I haven't seen either, but eventually I'm going to see the ghost of an alien, and that's going to be an amazing night. And then my last question, because I want to get us out of here. I know that you told me earlier you hadn't had dinner yet, and it's just cruel to keep you talking if you haven't had a chance to eat. So we'll end on this. My last question is always some variation of, if there was some bit of advice that someone could have given you toward the beginning of your career, as many bits of advice as you like, that would have made a significant difference and might make things easier for the writers who are listening now, what would you go back and tell yourself?
I think believe in your own abilities, which is a very difficult thing to do, and don't be afraid to ask for what you want, because I think that's also a very difficult thing to remember, especially when you're a woman or a person of color. I think sometimes you are your own worst enemy, like with the Spider-Man book, where I was like, I can't write this book. Who am I to write this book? And I had to have a friend who was like, no, you can write this book. Say yes. Because I think sometimes we realize that often we have to be twice as good to get half as far, and it makes us anxious about our own abilities, but we should trust in them and don't be afraid to say yes.
That is an excellent note to end on. I feel like we crushed it. Thank you so much for making the time to be here this evening and for kind of geeking out with me.
Of course.
For a bit. We had where can esteemed audience find you online, stalk you on Twitter, all that good stuff?
You can find me on Twitter at Run with Skizzers. That's Run with SKIZZERS. And on my website, preetichhibber.com. I'm also over on sci-fi.com a lot, or at Desi Geek Girls, but mostly Twitter and sometimes fandom stuff on Tumblr, both under Run with Skizzers.
As always, esteemed audience, find me at middlegreatninja.com. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. Read it for all the really nerdy Batman references that I put throughout. There are 3 chapters in the newest Banneker that in a row are called A Silent Guardian, A Watchful Protector, and A Dark Knight, but with an N rather than a K. Oh, we're having fun. So check that out. And God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.